Hey everybody, Tim here with today's episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Season 4, Episode 15, Bar Association. So first of all, this episode is not only great, but it's directed by LeVar Burton, aka Geordi LaForge. I think I've lost count. I think this is his third episode now, just for this season, maybe, of the episodes he's directed. He's such a good director. I can't wait. He directed one of my favorite episodes of Voyager. I really wish he would direct more, like, big budget movies, Discovery, Orville, I don't care. Anything with LeVar Burton behind the camera, he does fantastic. So this episode is mostly a Ferengi episode, and what's kind of weird is it doesn't really have, like, a main plot and a subplot. It has, like, a main plot and a bunch of little subplots, so it's kind of weird. But it's mostly about Rom is unhappy with the way Quark is running the bar. And he decides that he wants to basically start a union, which is kind of, here in America, it's kind of a bad word. Like, people don't like to hear about that, about unions and stuff like that. And because, like, they don't get paid leave, what starts the whole thing is Rom has an ear infection, and Quark will never let him take time off to go get it checked out, and he won't pay medical and stuff like that. And so O'Brien and Dr. Bashir are basically the ones that kind of start putting the seed in Rom's head about, like, well, maybe you should start asking for better rights or go on strike. And so Rom talks it over with Lita, who's her character's slowly building, and Rom does. He gets everybody to join with him, and while he's talking to Lita, it's kind of interesting. So throughout all of Star Trek, they've talked about umox with the Ferengi, and it's basically anytime they give, like, rub their ears. The episode that stands out for whatever reason to me is in The Next Generation, when Lwaxana Troi is, like, rubbing the Ferengi's ears, and he's like, "You give such good umox." And they always, like, moan and groan, and it's the greatest thing ever. And Rom is like, well, I'm just getting so much umox lately. And Lita's like, oh, who's the lucky woman? And Rom's like, nobody, just me. And it's basically, like, the first reference to masturbation in the series. And even when he says it, Lita's like, okay, that's awkward. And then he's like, do you want to do it? And she's like, nope, I'm leaving, bye-bye. And so I just thought that was kind of funny. Like, once again, Deep Space Nine is just kind of pushing that limit on what they can talk about. So anyways, he starts doing the union, and Jeffrey Combs' character, Brunt, shows up again, which, again, anytime we see Jeffrey Combs is fantastic. He's such a good actor. Brunt shows up and is basically like, you need to get this shit, like, shut down because it's against all sorts of laws. And, like, I guess if they were on Ferenginar, they would all be killed for even trying to start a union. But since they're on the station, he can't really do that. So he's like, we're going to seize all your assets. And Rom's like, dude, like, if we had assets worth seizing, we wouldn't be on a station working for Quark. And so Brunt has his Nausicaan, like, bodyguards just beat Quark up. And I said earlier in an episode that was all about Klingons, supposedly that was supposed to be about Nausicaans, but it was so good to see them. Like, I feel like Nausicaans are such an underappreciated species. And there's such a great scene where they're sitting there throwing darts into each other. So I love seeing Nausicaans. I think they're fun. And that's for those anime watchers, that's where Nausicaa, Valley of the Wind, Nausicaans get their name from that movie. So that's kind of fun. And by the time we get to the end, Quark agrees if Rom shuts down the Union, Quark will give them all of their wants. He'll up their wages, he'll give them leave, and all sorts of stuff. So everything kind of goes back to the way it was, but then Rom ends up quitting Quark's and starts working for the Federation. So I thought that was kind of cool, and it's good for him that he's finally starting to pursue those dreams. With some of the mini subplots, there are things like we see Dr. Bashir and O'Brien go on a holodeck adventure. O'Brien talks about how bored he was on the Enterprise, like just waiting for people to use the transporter, which is kind of a shout out to when Colin Meaney, anytime we saw his character, he was the transporter chief. And so they didn't use the transporter a whole lot. So there was this on-running joke about, like, well, what did he used to do when people didn't need a transporter? Did he just stand in the room, like just stand there positioned waiting? And that's basically what he alludes to that he did. And then finally, Worf just hates being on the station, and he can't get used to it. So he moves his quarters onto the Defiant because he spent a majority of his adult life on a starship, and so that's where he feels the most comfortable. And there's kind of an intense scene where he's talking to Dax, and Dax is like, I think you'll get used to it. And he's like, I don't think I'm going to have to get used to being on the station. I think the station's going to have to get used to me. And it's kind of an allegory for people that watch Deep Space Nine, because at that point, Deep Space Nine's been on the air for 3 years, and then Worf, of all people, joins the show, and he just has that big presence where everybody knows him. And so I think that was kind of a shout out to the people watching the show, that this is how it's going to be, and you have to get used to it. I could be reading way too much into it, but that's what it seemed like to me. So for those who have seen this one, what did you guys think about the Union? What did you guys think about the self-Umox? What did you think about Jeffrey Combs? What did you think about Worf moving the Defiant? And what do you guys think about LeVar Burton as a director? Like, do you think he has a special technique? Do you enjoy it? So go ahead, let me know in the comments below. Thank you guys for everything, and I will see you guys next time for a session.